You recording? Oh,
I'm just starting the recording. So we were at Discourse 9, Yudhishthira and others, which is on Yudhishthira and others calling on Bhishma, and Bhishma dropping his mortal coil and extolling Sri Krishna. So for context, where we left off, Yudhishthira was just crying to Krishna about his guilt that he feels for having been part of causing a war, and he feels guilty for the deaths of thousands of men, and was basically weeping about this to Krishna. So Sutta went on, thus afraid of the wrongs perpetrated against humanity, King Yudhishthira thereafter proceeded to Vinashana, the battlefield of Kurukshetra, where Devavrata Bhishma lay on his bed of arrows, seeking enlightenment about all sacred duties. Hold on a minute. Just a second. I think I may have skipped slightly ahead. No, never mind. That was right. So for context, this is obviously referring to the Mahabharata and assumes that the reader is familiar with the Mahabharata, but Bhishma is a wise warrior who had a boon that he could not die except at his own choosing. And he was shot with many arrows and fell on the battlefield during the war, but chose to wait for an auspicious time to die. And so he's lying on the battlefield full of arrows, but keeping himself alive with the power of his boon until the day comes when he would like to die on. So Yudhishthira is walking out there onto the field to talk to him. Thereupon all Yudhishthira's celebrated brothers followed him, O holy Brahmanas, in chariots decked with gold and driven by excellent horses, as also the sages Vyasa, Dhaumya, the family priest of the Pandavas, and others. Lord Sri Krishna himself, O Shaunaka, rode in a chariot along with Dhananjaya. Dhananjaya is another name of Arjuna. Accompanied by them, King Yudhishthira shone brightly like Kubera in the midst of Guhyakas. That's Kubera, the chief of the Yakshas, surrounded by Guhyakas are a type of Yakshas, his spirit servants. Perceiving Bhishma lying on the ground like a god fallen from heaven, the Pandavas and their attendants, as well as Sri Krishna, made obeisance to him. At that time, O Shaunaka, Brahmana sages, celestial sages, and royal sages, that's Brahma Rishis, Deva Rishis, and Raja Rishis, the three types of Rishis, all had assembled there in order to see Bhishma, the foremost of the Bharatas. Parvata, Narada, Dhaumya, the divine Badarayana, that's Veda Vyasa, Brihadashva, Bharadvaja, Parashurama, the son of Renuka, with his pupils, Vasishta, Indraparamada, Trita, Gritsamada, Asita, Kakshivan, Gautama, and Atri, Vishvamitra, a scion of Kushika, Sudarshana, and other holy sages like Brahmarata, that's Shuka, and even so Kashyapa, Angirasa, and others arrived there with their pupils, O Shaunaka. Seeing those highly blessed souls assembled there, Bhishma, the foremost of the Vasus, this is a reference because Bhishma is actually the son of Ganga Devi, and the Vasudevas, not Vasudeva like Narayana, but the lesser Vasudevas, there's 8 of them, had taken birth as his brothers, and so he's being called the foremost of the Vasus, who was well versed in the principles of right conduct, paid his respect to them with due regard to the occasion and place. Bhishma was also acquainted with the glory of Sri Krishna, the Lord of the universe, who had sat before him in a personal form assumed through Maya, and was also enthroned in his heart, and he paid his homage to him. Eyes blinded with tears of affection, Bhishma looked at the sons of Pandu, who sat beside him, full of modesty and love, and spoke to them as follows. How painful and how unjust it has been that you, the progeny of righteousness and votaries of the Brahmanas, Dharma and Lord Achyuta, should have lived a life of suffering, which you surely did not deserve. When the great warrior Pandu breathed his last, you were all tender of age, and my daughter-in-law, Prita, along with you, her children, had to suffer many hardships on your account more than once. I believe that all your unwelcome experiences were attributable to time, for the whole world with its guardian deities is ruled over by time, even as the clouds are by the wind. Where King Yudhishthira, the son of Dharma, was the ruler, Bhima held the mace in his hand, Arjuna was the archer and Gandiva the bow, and where Sri Krishna was the friend and well-wisher, to think of adversity even there. Indeed, no man, O king, can ever discover the intention of Sri Krishna. Even seers get bewildered in their seeking to find it out. Therefore, knowing it for certain that all these events depend on the will of Providence, O chief of the Bharatas, follow his will, O ruler of men, and protect the helpless people, as you are their sole monarch. Sri Krishna is God himself. He is none other than the prime person, Lord Narayana. Deluding the world by his Maya, he lives incognito among the Vrishnis. The Vrishnis are a branch of the Yadu clan. No one else than Lord Shiva, the celestial sage Narada, and Lord Kapila himself, O Yudhishthira, know the most hidden glory of Sri Krishna, whom you think to be your cousin, beloved friend and greatest well-wisher, and whom out of affection you made your counselor, envoy, and charioteer. In him, who is the soul of the universe, who looks upon all with the same eye, is one without a second and is free from egotism and blemishless. There can be no sense of diversity in regard to these divergent functions on any account. Yet, O king, look at his compassion for those who are exclusively devoted to him, in that Sri Krishna has appeared in person before me at this hour, when I am about to give up the ghost. A yogi who casts off his body with his thought fixed on him through devotion and chanting his name with his tongue is rid of all hankerings and released from the bondage of actions. May that Lord, who is adorable even for gods and possessed of 4 arms, whose lotus-like countenance beams with gracious smiles and reddish eyes, and who appears to others only in their meditation, stay on here till I shuffle off this body. Sutta continued. Hearing this, Yudhishthira asked Bhishma, even as he lay on his cage-like bed of arrows, this is because his whole body is riddled with arrows on all sides. Yudhishthira asked him questions concerning a variety of dharmas in the presence of the rishis. Thereupon Bhishma, who had realized the truth, discoursed upon, one by one, the various dharmas determined by the innate disposition of men and apportioned with due regard to their varna and ashrama, and the twofold dharmas, the dharmas involving worldly activity, pravrati dharma, and those marked by withdrawal from worldly activity, nivrati dharma, severally recommended for those endowed with dispassion and those who are full of worldly attachment. The dharmas relating to charitable gifts, the duties obligatory on monarchs, the courses of conduct which are conducive to liberation, the duties of women, and the courses of conduct that are intended to propitiate the Lord, both briefly and in detail. He also explained, O Shaunaka, the 4 ends of human pursuit, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, as well as the means to them in their true perspective with the help of many illustrative anecdotes and stories. While he was thus discoursing on dharma, all of those discourses are given in full in the Mahabharata and are not repeated here, there arrived the time when the sun changes its course towards the north, a time which is coveted by yogis who drop their body according to their pleasure. That was the day on which we started this Bhagavatam reading, incidentally. Thereupon Bhishma, who had led on the battlefield thousands of warriors, wound up his speech, in other words, stopped speaking, and exclusively fixed his mind, which was absolutely free from worldly attachment, as well as his eyes, which knew no winking, on Sri Krishna, the prime person, who was present before him in his four-armed form, clad in shining yellow robes. The last traces of sin, if any, left in him, were obliterated by his concentrated thought on the Most Holy, and the pain which he felt on account of the arrows piercing his body quickly disappeared at a mere glance of the Lord. Now, while casting off his body, he stopped all the activities and wanderings of his senses and extolled Lord Janardana. Bhishma said, "Now, on the eve of my departure, I offer my mind, which is free from all thirst for worldly enjoyment, to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, the foremost of the Yadus, who, while retaining his own blissful character all along, sometimes assumes his own prakriti in order to carry on his sport, from which flows the stream of creation. May I cherish motiveless love for Sri Krishna, the friend of Vijaya, that's Arjuna, who has assumed a personality charming to the three worlds and dark as the Tamala tree, and is clad in excellent robes, brilliant as the rays of the sun, and whose lotus-like countenance has curly locks floating about it. May my mind, body, and soul rest in Sri Krishna, whose face is hemmed all round by flowing hair, soiled with the dust raised by the horses' hoofs on the battlefield, and is bedecked with drops of perspiration, and whose skin is being pierced by my sharp arrows, though protected with a shining armor. May I develop love for the friend of Pritha's son, Arjuna, who, at the request of his friend, immediately drove and placed his chariot in the middle of the Pandava and the Kaurava hosts, in other words, in between the two, and planting himself there, cut short the life of the hostile warriors by his very looks. May I be blessed with devotion to the feet of that supreme being who, by imparting spiritual knowledge, in the form of the Gita, dispelled the delusion of his friend, who, on seeing us, generals of the Kaurava forces, at the van of the hostile army arrayed at a distance, felt disinclined to kill his own kith and kin because he regarded it as a sin. Breaking his own vow not to take up arms during the war, to fulfill and exalt my vow of compelling him to take up arms, Sri Krishna jumped down from the car on which he had taken his seat, and like a lion that pounces upon an elephant to kill him, darted towards me with the wheel of his chariot in his hand, the earth trembling under his feet and his upper garment dropping off behind him. Hit with the piercing arrows of a desperado like me and bathed in blood, and with his armor broken, he who rushed forth to kill me, disregarding the remonstrances of Arjuna, may that Lord Mukunda, the bestower of blessedness, be my asylum. May I, in my last moments, develop love for the Lord, who, having taken upon himself the responsibility to protect the chariot of Vijaya, Arjuna, took the charioteer's whip in one hand and held the horse's reins in another, and looked most attractive in that charming role, witnessing which, at their last moment, they who fell on this battlefield attained a form similar to his, or sarupya mukti, a form of moksha or mukti in which you obtain a form that resembles the form of your Ishta Devata. Having had the signal honor of enjoying the sight of his charming gait, graceful movements, winsome smiles, and amorous glances, during the famous Rasa dance at Vrindavana, the cowherdesses, or gopis, in their mad ecstasy imitated his plays when the Lord suddenly disappeared from their midst, and attained identity with him. In an assembly crowded with hosts of sages and foremost princes during the Rajasuya Yajna performed by Yudhishthira, the Rajasuya is a yajna performed by a monarch with the cooperation and help of his tributary princes at the time of his coronation, as a mark of his undisputed sovereignty over them all. So when Yudhishthira was performing this, Sri Krishna, who attracted the eyes of them all, had the honor of being worshipped first of all before my very eyes. It is he, the soul of the universe, who has appeared before me at this moment. Having shaken off the foolish idea of diversity, I have realized that unborn Lord, who, though one, is severally enthroned in the heart of all embodied creatures brought forth by himself, even as the sun, though one, appears as many to every eye. In other words, because everyone sees the sun from their own perspective. Sutta went on, Having thus merged his soul with all the activities of his mind, speech, and the visual sense in Sri Krishna, the universal soul, Bhishma expired, his breath being dissolved into the atmospheric air. Perceiving that Bhishma had entered into the one indivisible Brahma, all those present there became silent, even as birds do at the close of day. Then sounded kettle drums beaten by the gods and human beings. The pious among the princes shouted applause, and showers of flowers poured from heaven. Having had the funeral and other rites performed in respect of the deceased, O Shaunaka, descendant of Bhrigu, Yudhishthira was plunged in sorrow for some time. The sages who had assembled there extolled Sri Krishna with great delight, uttering his secret names, and then, with Sri Krishna in their heart, they returned, each to his own hermitage. Thereafter Yudhishthira, accompanied by Sri Krishna, returned to Hastinapura and comforted his uncle Dhritarashtra, as well as his aunt Gandhari, who was known for her austerity. Then, permitted by his uncle and with the approval of Sri Krishna, the son of Vasudeva, the king ruled over his ancestral kingdom with righteousness. Thus ends the 9th discourse on the recovery of the throne by Yudhishthira in Book 1 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana. Discourse 10, Sri Krishna's departure to Dwaraka. Shaunaka said, having got rid of the ruffians who sought to rob him of his lawful heritage, how did Yudhishthira, the foremost of pious rulers, proceed to rule his kingdom with his younger brothers, and what did he accomplish later, averse as he was to the gratification of his senses? Sutta continued, having revived the race of Kuru that had been consumed by the fire of internecine feud, in other words, of interfamily feud and warfare, even as the wildfire produced by the rubbing of bamboo stems against one another consumes a whole forest of bamboos, and established Yudhishthira on his throne, the almighty Sri Hari, the promoter of the world, rejoiced at heart. Having shaken off his infatuation by force of the wisdom that had dawned on him as a result of his hearing the teachings of Bhishma and the exhortation of Lord Achyuta, Yudhishthira ruled over the whole earth, stretching as far as the ocean, like Indra, enjoying as he did the protection of Sri Krishna and the loyal submission of his younger brothers. The god of rain poured down copious showers. The earth yielded all that was desired, while cows that had large udders gladly sprinkled the stalls with milk. Rivers, seas, mountains, trees, and creepers, and other herbs and plants all bore him abundant products in due season. Living beings had no worries or physical ailment nor afflictions of any kind, whether brought about by a wrathful providence, any fellow being, or by one's own self, in the form of bodily or mental suffering, at any time whatsoever, so long as Yudhishthira, who regarded none as his enemy, reigned as king. After spending some months at Hastinapura for the consolation of his friends and relatives, as well as for the satisfaction of his sister, Subhadra, wife of Arjuna, Sri Hari asked leave of King Yudhishthira to return home, and permitted by him, he embraced him and bowed to him, and embraced or greeted in turn by others, those who were of the same age or younger, mounted his chariot. Subhadra, Draupadi, Kunti, and Uttara, the daughter of King Virata, and even so Gandhari, Dhritarashtra, Yuyutsu, the only surviving son of Dhritarashtra, born of a Vaishya wife, Kripacharya, born in the line of the sage Gotama, Nakula and Sahadeva, the twin, the youngest two Pandavas who were twins, Bhimasena and Dhaumya, and Satyavati, Bhishma's stepmother, and other ladies, almost fainted with sorrow, unable to bear separation from the Lord who wielded the Sharanga bow. A wise man who has abjured evil company through the fellowship of saints cannot even afford to forego the privilege of listening to his sweet praises being sung by others, having once had the opportunity to hear them. How then could the Pandavas, the sons of Pritha, bear separation from the Lord, on whom they had bestowed their mind and heart, having had the privilege not only of seeing him at close quarters, touching his person, and conversing with him, but also of reposing, sitting, and dining with him? Regarding him with unwinking eyes, bound as they were by ties of affection to him, they all hurried to and fro to fetch parting presents for him, their heart running after him. As Sri Krishna, son of Devaki, was about to depart from the palace, the ladies, who were bound to him by ties of kinship, restrained their tears of affection from trickling down, anxious as they were lest any harm might come to him, since it was a belief that weeping when parting from someone is unpropitious or inauspicious. Tabors, conches, kettle drums, lutes, cymbals, trumpets, dhundhuris, drums, gongs, and other musical instruments sounded, as also dundubis, which are big drums. Going up to the top of their mansions in order to have a look at Sri Krishna, the ladies of the Kuru race rained flowers on him, greeting him with smiling looks through mingled feeling of affection and bashfulness. The thick-haired Arjuna, the favorite of Sri Krishna, held over his most beloved friend his white umbrella, which was bordered with strings of pearls and had a handle of precious stones, while Uddhava and Satyaki held a pair of most wonderful chowries. Those are shells, chowry shells that are a symbol of rajas and of kingship. Greeted with showers of flowers on the way, Sri Krishna, the lord of the Madhus, shone brilliantly. Everywhere were heard true benedictions pronounced by the Brahmanas, which were unsuited to the Lord as viewed in his unqualified absolute aspect, but were quite appropriate to him in his qualified or personal form. Then began a talk which ravished the ears and hearts of all among the women of Hastinapura, the capital of the Kurus, who had riveted their heart on Sri Krishna, of excellent renown. Verily, he is the same eternal person who abides in his singular, undifferentiated self, even during the night of universal dissolution, prior to the manifestation of the three gunas, when the individual souls retire into God, the universal spirit, and when all the forces of creation, the Mahat and its evolutes, it's a reference to Sankhya philosophy, too lie dormant in the unmanifest. It was he who, with the intention of endowing with a form and name the spirit, who has neither, then inspired his prakriti, which deludes the jivas, who are identical in essence with him, and which, impelled by his own energy, the time spirit, is disposed to create, and revealed the Vedas and other scriptures. Indeed, he is the same supreme spirit whose reality in this world is perceived by seers who have subdued their senses and fully controlled their breath, with a mind yearning for his sight and cleansed of all impurities through devotion. For it is he alone who can thoroughly cleanse our heart, which cannot be so purified by any other means. Again, O friend, he is the same supreme Lord whose sacred stories have been sung again and again in the Vedas and other esoteric scriptures by seers like Maharishi Vyasa that have expounded profound truths, and who in his own sportful ways creates, maintains, and reabsorbs the universe all by himself, and yet does not set attached to the same universe. Whenever kings whose intellect is clouded by tamas live by unrighteousness, verily it is he who, by recourse to the quality of pure sattva, reveals in himself the divine attributes of omnipotence, etc., as well as truthfulness, righteousness, compassion, and superhuman activity, and assumes various forms from age to age for the good of the world. Oh, how supremely praiseworthy is the race of Yadu that has been honored by this supreme person, the Lord of Sri. Sri is another name of Lakshmi, through his descent therein. And oh, how supremely sacred is the forest associated with the name of the demon Madhu. That's the area of Vraja that surrounds the city of Mathura, that has been graced by him through his ramblings, meaning his playful wanderings. The city of Kushasthali, another name of Dwaraka, overshadows the fame of heaven and brings merit and renown to the earth. For the people of that city always behold their Lord casting his smiling looks on them whenever he graciously moves out of his palace. Surely God Almighty must have been thoroughly propitiated in some previous birth through fasts, ablutions in sacred waters, oblations to the sacred fire, etc., by the ladies whose hand has been espoused by him, in that they constantly drink. O friend, the nectar from his lips, the very thought of which maddened the women of Raja. Oh, how blessed are his 8 principal consorts, Rukmini, who gave birth to Pradyumna, Jambavati, the mother of Samba, and Nagnajiti, who bore Amba, and so on, who were carried off as prizes of valor at an assembly of suitors after vanquishing powerful princes like Shishupala, the king of the Chedis, and those others who were brought in thousands after slaying the demon Naraka, the son of goddess Earth. So that's a reference to something. Krishna, together with one of his wives, Satyabhama, killed a demon Naraka and rescued 16,100 slave wives of the demon. And rather than leave them as widows, Krishna married them all jointly. So that's the reference to those who were brought in thousands after slaying the demon Naraka. These women have brought sanctity to an exalted womanhood, which has not been allowed freedom and is wanting in purity, inasmuch as their lotus-eyed Lord, who ever delight their heart by his charming behaviors and loving presence, like the celestial tree of Parijata, that was a present that he gave his wife Satyabhama, and never moves out of their mansions even for a moment, because Krishna is present in multiple places at once and always with all of his wives simultaneously. While the women folk of Hastinapura were uttering such words, Sri Hari went his way, greeting them by his smiling looks. Apprehending danger from his foes, King Yudhishthira dispatched out of sheer affection an army consisting of all the four limbs. The four limbs of the army in ancient India are elephants, horses, chariots, and foot soldiers, to serve as an escort for Sri Krishna, the slayer of the demon Madhu. That's Madhusudana, one of the names of Krishna. Sri Krishna, the grandson of Shurasena, now sent back the Pandavas, the descendants of Kuru, who being strongly attached to him had come very far, distressed at the thought of separation from him. He then departed for his own city, Dwaraka, with his favorite companions, Uddhava, Satyaki, and others. Passing through the territories of Kuru Jangala, Panchala, and Shurasena, which is Mathura, and the tract stretching along the banks of the Yamuna, as well as Brahmavarta and Kurukshetra, the kingdoms of Matsya and Sarasvata, the territory stretching along the banks of the Sarasvati River, and Marudhanva, the Lord reached the kingdom of Anarta, which in modern India is called Gujarat, lying beyond the principalities of Sauvira and Abhira, O Shaunaka, his horses being a bit exhausted by that time. In every part of the country he passed through, the people residing there honored Sri Hari with presents. At dusk, he would alight from his car and, repairing to some lake, say his Sandhya prayers. Discourse 11. Sutta continued, reaching his highly prosperous territory of Anarta, Sri Krishna blew his great conch, Panchajanya, to soothe, as it were, the grief of his people caused by his long absence. Being thus blown, the conch, with its white bulb turned red on account of its contact with the rosy lips of the Almighty Lord, shone resplendent in his lotus palms like a loudly singing swan perched on a pair of red lotuses. Hearing that blast, which scared away the terror of the world, the entire population of Dwaraka sallied forth to meet him, longing to see their Lord. They respectfully brought their presents to the Lord, who rejoiced in his own self and was ever perfect in his own inherent bliss, even as one would offer lights to the sun god. In other words, it's pointing out the amusing nature of making offerings to Krishna, who possesses all of their offerings to begin with. It would be like lighting a light to the sun god, which is something people do. And their countenance beaming with joy, they addressed him, the friend and protector of all, in a voice choked with delight, even as children would speak to their father. O Lord, we ever bow down before your lotus feet, adored even by Brahma the creator, Lord Shiva and Indra, the supreme resort of those aspiring for the highest bliss and beyond the realm of Kala, the time spirit, the supreme ruler. Be pleased to promote our happiness, O creator of the universe, for you are our mother and disinterested friend, our Lord and Father. Nay, you are our true preceptor and supreme deity. We have become blessed by serving you. Oh, how fortunate are we in having you as our Lord, since we behold your lovely form, the abode of all charms, and your countenance with its loving smiles and affectionate looks, a rare sight even for the gods residing in heaven. Whenever, O Lord with lotus eyes, you depart for Hastinapura or to Mathura to see your friends and relatives, every moment that passes without you appears to us as long as a myriad years, and we feel as miserable as eyes without the sun, O Achyuta. Hearing the words uttered by the people, the Lord, who was so fond of his devotees, entered the city, extending his grace to all through his looks. Even as the city of Bhagavati, the capital of Patalaloka, is guarded by the Nagas. Bhagavati is the capital city of the Nagas of Patala, the underworld. The city of Dwaraka was protected by the Madhus, the Bhojas, the Dasharahas, the Arhas, the Kukuras, the Andhakas, and the Vrishnis. Those are the branches of the Yadava race, who were their own equals in strength, meaning all equal to each other and equaled by none. It was adorned with lotus lakes that were surrounded by orchards, gardens, and parks full of sacred trees, and arbors rich in all the products of every season. The gates of the city and the palaces, as well as the thoroughfares, were adorned with festoons as a mark of festivity, because Krishna was returning. The city was further decorated with flags and banners of various shapes and designs, the fluttering ends of which intercepted the sun here and there. Its highways, streets, bazaars, and quadrangles, meaning like city squares, had been thoroughly cleaned and sprinkled with scented water and were strewn with fruits, flowers, unbroken rice, that means unhusked rice, like rice that hasn't been threshed but is still in its husk, and sprouts that had been rained as the Lord of something auspicious, like people threw handfuls of these things at Krishna, and so afterward they were all over the streets. The entrance of every house in the city was adorned with curds, unbroken rice, fruits and sugar cane, pitchers full of water, offering, some other offerings, incense and lights. The noble-minded Vasudeva, Sri Krishna's father, and Akrura, Vasudeva's cousin, and King Ugrasena, Sri Krishna's maternal granduncle, and Sri Rama, that's Balarama, Sri Krishna's elder brother, of marvelous prowess, and Pradyumna and Charudeshna, Krishna's sons by Rukmini, and Samba, Krishna's son by Jambavati, in transport of joy, quitted their beds and seats and even meals on hearing of the return of their most beloved Sri Krishna. Excited with emotion and full of joy and esteem, they placed a lordly elephant at their head to serve as a good omen, and accompanied with Brahmanas reciting benedictory hymns and equipped with articles of good omen, they mounted their chariots and sallied forth to meet the Lord amid the blast of conches and trumpets and the chanting of Vedic hymns. The chief among the courtesans, whose faces looked very charming with their cheeks irradiated by splendid earrings, proceeded in their hundreds in palanquins, eager to have a look at him. Even so, actors, dancers, and songsters, singers, as well as panegyrists, bards, and minstrels. A panegyrist means like praise singers, basically people whose job it is to praise kings. Glorified the wonderful exploits of the Lord of excellent renown. The Lord on that occasion met his kinsmen in attendance as well as the citizens in the appropriate manner and showed his consideration to all, gratifying them all down to the pariah by bowing down his head, greeting in respectful terms, clasping to the bosom, pressing the hand of and greeting with smiles and endearing looks, and granting them boons of their choice, and himself blessed by his elders, the Brahmanas and their wives, the aged folk and others, including the panegyrists, the Almighty Lord entered the city. We should pause there because of the time limit on Zoom. I'm going to close the Zoom room and then reopen it again right away. So give me just a minute or so to get it up and then click on the same link and we can keep going.